and welcome. The 7-issue Marville series from 2002, written by Bill Jemas and illustrated by Mark Bright, is a perfect example of a bad idea done poorly. It is an unprofessional piece of work with no redeemable features whatsoever. It teems with self-indulgence and spite. And it most certainly wouldn't exist if it wasn't written by the then publisher of Marvel Comics. The origin of Marville begins with a But I Digress column written by Peter David in 2002. This column, which regularly appeared in Comic Buyer's Guide for many years, was an open letter to both Joe Quesada and Bill Jemas. These two were the power couple, so to speak, in charge of Marvel Comics at the time. One of the many titles Peter David was writing was Captain Marvel, and it was decided the price of that title would be raised from $250 to $275. David was of the opinion that this price would effectively kill the title. This increased cost would ensure new readers would ignore the book. Furthermore, the new price would also give ongoing readers an excuse to jump off the series because it was now too expensive. So sales would plummet and the inevitable cancellation would occur. In order to prevent what he viewed as certain cancellation, David proposed within his column to lower his writing fee on Captain Marvel to the ironic price of $20.99 per issue, and he would continue to charge this dramatically lowered fee until the comic met certain sales expectations. Due to his calculations, David figured if he charged a nominal writing fee and the price of the comic remained the same, Marvel would suffer no loss in profits. And, perhaps, his very public dedication to the series might interest new readers and boost overall sales. It was a bold but reasonable offer, and David was a well-known creator with a reasonably long list of credits, most notably an unbroken 12-year run on Incredible Hulk. So this very public offer, which was spread around the internet, was something that required a reply. In response, Bill Jemas, the president of Marvel Comics, proposed another option. It was something that would be called the You Decide Challenge. Captain Marvel would be rebooted with a new #1, and it would compete against two other titles, Ultimate Adventures and Marville. The title with the best sales would continue on. The losers would get a cream pie to the face and have to sit inside a dunking tank. The tank being located at a Wizard World convention in 2003. Yup, it got that childish and ridiculous. However, this basically sums up what would be known as the Bill Jemas years at Marvel Comics. Bill Jemas effectively became Marvel Comics publisher in the year 2000, and he stayed in that role until roughly 2003. In those 3 years, he created at least as much controversy as Jim Shooter, the polarizing editor-in-chief of Marvel from 1978 to 1987. Ironically, they both share another distinction. They made numerous necessary changes to stabilize the company and generate profit. During his tenure, Jemas would create the Ultimate Universe and the Max line of comics. He removed Marvel from the Comics Code Authority, stopped rampant overprinting, and he fully embraced trade paperback editions. He also appointed creator-friendly Joe Quesada to the editor-in-chief position. All of these efforts pulled Marvel Comics out of bankruptcy and re-established the company as a preeminent mainstream publisher. However, by many accounts, Bill Jemas was a dictatorial micromanager that gave orders, directly interfering with the direction of many titles. Like Jim Shooter, Jemas had specific ideas concerning what made a title successful. Unlike Shooter, Jemas didn't have the experience or creativity or the self-awareness to recognize that his position in the company wasn't acquired through experience within the comic book medium. He essentially fell into the position, and being creative wasn't in his skill set. He was a businessman, not a content creator. As an example, according to Mark Waid, in an interview with Ain't It Cool in 2009, Jemas decided the Fantastic Four had to move to the suburbs and be dumbed down so they'd be more relatable to a general audience. Their nemesis wouldn't be Dr. Doom, but a suspicious neighbor named Gladys Kravitz. While this absurd creative direction was abandoned due to Jemas being removed from Marvel, it was something Waid had to take seriously and try to implement on the main Fantastic Four title. Side note, it's possible this idea might have been the basis for the Marvel Knights 4 title in 2004. The premise and some of the details seem very similar to the ones described by Waid. End of side note. This brings us to Marville. Despite editors being assigned to the book, there was clearly no editorial oversight on this series. The stories, such as they are barely coherent. Marville also contains basic spelling and grammatical errors. Even the laziest, most incompetent editor would have spotted these and corrected them. The first two issues are the parody or satire issues. And, well, they are neither. To begin with, the issue opens with a page explaining who is being satirized. And, if you have to thoroughly explain the punchline beforehand, you're writing bad jokes. In fact, you're not writing jokes. You're writing ad hominem attacks, and all you're doing is making sure the people you're trying to insult know they're being insulted. The plot is a terrible attempt at satirizing Superman's origin, but it's pure nonsense, and a thin excuse to take cheap shots at DC and Paul Levitz, the publisher of DC. Just trying to figure out the logic of the story will give one an existential breakdown. The focus is all over the place, and it lacks an internal logic to hold the premise together. Also, the story continually goes out of its way to point out people who are supposed to be known celebrities. This is almost an accidentally interesting bit. The reason being, the people being mentioned aren't even remotely represented in the artwork. Now, it's quite likely this isn't the artist's fault, or an indication of their lack of skill or ability. It may be the only example of self-aware caution present in this comic. Within parody and satire, public figures can be represented without legal repercussions. Mad Magazine has been doing this for decades. That being said, that doesn't prevent public figures from pursuing legal proceedings for defamation or misuse of their image or whatever. Tony Twist's lawsuit against Todd McFarlane being a prime example. So one can reasonably conclude this lack of visual representation was intentionally done to avoid any possible lawsuits. If true, and it should be noted this is heavy speculation, but if this is true, then it indicates there was at least some acknowledgement that Marville was indefensibly nasty and libelous. Legally, it probably wouldn't meet the requirements of satire or parody. If there was any editorial input, this may be where they intervened. The point of the first issue, if one can claim it has one, is to say, DC is only successful because it's owned and funded by a wealthy corporation. Marvel is successful because the corporation I work for bought it when it was bankrupt and I turned it around. Or something. Seriously, it's difficult to determine if there is an actual point. The second issue is a superhero parody? Big question mark at the end of that sentence. Its point of view is unclear, and most of its content is questionable. Over the next 3 issues, the series completely shifts its focus. The protagonist decides to time travel back to the beginning of creation and have a chat with God. With the premise established, we're then treated to Jemas' long-winded, poorly formed argument concerning the origins of life. It's pretty much the dictionary definition of polemic. There's even a token straw woman character that's literally shouted down at one point just in case she's seen as making actual sense. Furthermore, and I hate to repeat this phrase again, but these 3 issues are the literal definition of the God in the Gap's logical fallacy. The basics being, in areas where science is incomplete or represented by a theory that requires further empirical data, it's argued only a supernatural force could have intervened to produce the known result. Basically, it's intellectual laziness. It's also condescending. Regardless of a person's belief system, one can't help but feel the writer is talking down to the audience. In the third issue, for no discernible artistic reason, the artwork is digitally painted. It's an artistic choice that's abandoned shortly thereafter. But it's not the only choice that's baffling. The lettering is pasted over top of the page without any thought given to the artwork underneath it. The letterer, Chris Eliopoulos, is accomplished and experienced in the craft, so it's difficult to believe it was his choice to letter the comic in this manner. It simply looks terrible and unprofessional, and it's almost unreadable. Mind you, it's also overwritten. There's so much text, it almost completely obscures the artwork. Stage directions, which are completely unnecessary except to indicate to the artist how the sequence is being framed, are also included. Which is probably why the artist, Mark Bright, put the bare amount of effort into the illustrations. I mean, why bother when the text is going to cover everything up? Again, every allegedly creative decision on this specific issue is utterly, completely, totally wrong. Issue number 6 is nothing but a recap of the prior 5 issues. The boring, undeveloped protagonist pitches the Marville series to an unseen editor. Nothing new is learned, and there is no further insight into the series. It's a completely unnecessary recap issue. The 7th issue is a corporate pitch for the newly revived Epic Comics imprint. It also includes submission guidelines for those interested in submitting their project. At a glance, it doesn't seem fundamentally different than what Marvel Knights was doing at that time, although it does encourage the usage of more obscure characters in creative ways. One cannot overlook the irony that Marville probably wouldn't have passed the basic fundamentals outlined in the 7th issue. After 6 issues, Captain Marvel was the clear winner in the You Decide challenge. Ultimate Adventures would experience delays. Its 6th and final issue would arrive a year after the challenge had begun. It's only notable because it outsold Marville, despite its delays. Both Marville and Ultimate Adventures were subsequently cancelled. Captain Marvel continued on for 25 issues in total, and then it too was cancelled due to low sales. Shortly after the conclusion of Marville, Bill Jemas was removed from Marvel Comics. The details concerning this removal are mostly unclear. It's presumed he was at odds with Avi Arad, the president of Marvel Studios. At the time, Marvel movies were gaining traction, and they were just about to become the next big thing. This gave Arad a fair amount of power within the company. Allegedly, the creative direction Jemas greenlit or chose for many titles made those characters difficult to sell as movie properties, which made Arad's job that much harder. As an example, the Fury Max miniseries from 2001, written by Garth Ennis and illustrated by Derek Robertson. Reportedly, due to its excessive violence and Fury's unredeemable characteristics, George Clooney walked away from a starring role in a Nick Fury movie. This displeased Arad for very obvious reasons. Examples such as this, and Jemas' taunting presence on social media, probably all contributed to his removal. Ultimately, Marville was simply a symptom of Jemas' overall behavior at the time. In the end, Marville is an example of exactly how not to do a comic book, or any creative work for that matter. It's self-absorbed, condescending, and unprofessional. This brings me to a final point. The most egregious error this series makes is it doesn't respect its audience. It presumes the audience won't get the jokes. It presumes the audience won't get the arguments. It presumes the audience will reject the material because they just don't get it. And worst of all, it insults the audience for these false presumptions. In a sadly ironic manner, the Bill Jemas years at Marvel Comics were a fascinating, slightly experimental time for the company. A lot of projects were interesting and unique, and while many weren't overly successful, they were still something different from the average Marvel product. It's highly unfortunate that one title, and the excesses found within, overshadow what could have been a brief era remembered for its creativity. Instead, it became an example of unrestrained ego and self-indulgence. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. If you would like to go a step further, click Join and select the option most suitable for you. Any and all support is greatly appreciated. Thank you. That's it for today. Like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will talk at you later. Until next time.